Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's episode is a guest expert episode, and we actually have 2 guest experts today. Today we are talking about puberty, and before you think, oh, I don't have kids that age, this is not for me, we are going to be talking not only about how to support your child who may be going through or about to go through puberty, but we're also going to be talking about how to talk to younger kids and how we can best prepare them for the upcoming changes in their bodies. I said we have 2 experts today. One of them is my daughter, Maxine, who's going to be talking about her own experience of when she first got her first period and the celebration that we had with her and for her. And our other guest expert is Dr. Rachael Gibson, and she is the Senior Program Manager of AMAZE Education at Advocates for Youth. She's also a certified sex educator and has taught comprehensive sexuality education all over the U.S. and the world, and in her free time, she's an avid hiker, dancer, and traveler. Dr. Rachael, also known as Dr. G, and I had a really great conversation about the challenges that our children go through when they're going through puberty, and also, how to have conversations with our kids throughout their younger years so that puberty isn't as difficult or fearful or shameful for them as it could be if we didn't have these conversations. So for sure, however old your kids are, you'll want to stick around, and you'll also want to hear my daughter, if you stick around to the end, talking about her experience of having her red party that we had when she got her first period. And it's something that I wish everyone would do for their daughters. I think it really made a huge difference for her and how she felt about the changes that she was experiencing. So be sure to stick around and hear from Maxine. But first, let's dive in and meet Dr. G and hear what she has to teach all of us parents about supporting our kids as they go through puberty, or how to prepare them for when they do inevitably go through puberty. Hi, Dr. G. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. And we are going to be talking about all things puberty today. And before any of our listeners with little kids turn it off, I want to make sure that they know we're also going to be talking about how you prepare your children for the changes that will inevitably come. So this one is for parents of children of all ages.
Yes, definitely.
All right. I wanted to start, I was reading the New Yorker yesterday and I saw this most hilarious cartoon, and it has 4 teenagers on horseback, and it says, the 4 horsemen of adulthood: acne, BO, body hair, and urges. I thought it was a really funny way to start our conversation, the 4 horsemen of adulthood. So can you tell us a little bit about, let's go in reverse here. Let's talk about, first of all, maybe you could just give us a sort of a definition of puberty, and just to get us all on the same foot. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so puberty is just that time that we all remember, fondly or not fondly, of just our body is starting to change, right? And all the hormones are basically activating, and all the things happen to our bodies, right? We're not only growing, but our sexual and reproductive organs are changing. And our bodies are just getting used to this new hormone change, and it's a time of unbalance, right? Because it not only affects us physically, but also emotionally and socially. So there's all 3 of these things kind of colliding at once, which can be so challenging, right, for any person, but especially when we're so young and still just trying to figure out life in general.
And what ages today do you think are the average ages of puberty? And is it different for boys and girls?
It still really varies, as young as 8 to 15 or 16. Usually, young people that are girls do start the process earlier. but it really can vary, right? We have folks that start their periods when they're as young as 9, right? Which is scary time sometimes for some adults that aren't ready for that. But then some don't get it until they're 15. But that process of puberty is really long, right? And so we're talking 8 or 9 till 14, 15 years old in that age range.
Okay, great. So puberty is basically the changing from a kid body to an adult body.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you mentioned social challenges and emotional challenges and physical challenges. Can you share with us maybe some of what you see in your work as the common challenges that children face when they're going through puberty, and maybe some ideas of what parents can expect and how we can best support kids who are going through puberty?
Yeah. I think one thing that happens to young people going through puberty is they don't know what to expect, right? And so this thing is happening to them that they don't have any control over. And a lot of times they don't know it's happening, right? A lot of parents don't talk to their kids, right? And a lot of schools aren't teaching it. So then all these things are happening and they often feel very isolated. And right when you're young, a preteen, a teen, it's only happening to you, you feel like. So you feel isolated and you feel like there's something wrong. And so you don't know what to expect, right? I always think of that scene from the movie My Girl. I don't know if you've seen it when the young girl runs out screaming, "I'm hemorrhaging," right? Because no one told her about a period, right? And wouldn't we all like that is a normal reaction if suddenly you're bleeding out of your body, right? So that's one of these big things. They don't know what to expect because they're not being talked to about it in ways that are shame free, right? Sometimes when we talk about it, it's still like this shame, secret, scary thing. So then it's like afraid and anxiety. And especially for young people that are socialized as girls, it can be even heightened, right? Because the scary bleeding is going to happen and all this anxiety comes with that.
What I remember is being told that you're going to be a woman, and I remember thinking, I'm not ready to be a woman. Like when I'm only like 12.
The pressure. I'm like, what? I mean, I had my mom was very open. I knew a lot of things. And even when I first got my period, I didn't realize what it was, even though I had knew it was coming. And I was so upset that I got it because I
Me
didn't
too.
want to be a woman. I was like, but I'm playing with my friends. That sounds like a lot of pressure. I want to just be like living my best life out here. So it's so important to, we want to do all these great things, which is beautiful to celebrate, but also we don't want to create the anxiety for our young people because you're now a woman, you're now a man is like a lot of pressure. What does that mean?
So the pressure, that may be a little bit of fear because you don't know what's going on if your parents haven't talked to you about it or you haven't learned about it in school. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. We're going to talk about how to talk to little kids. So maybe it's not so scary when they do start experiencing the changes in their bodies. You mentioned emotional challenges.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the hormones affect us, right? Even as adults, our hormones affect us, right? We've all been when we're crying and we don't know why, right?
Oh,
And
and then you get
so,
your period the next day, like, oh,
and
that's
you're
what
like, oh, I've had my period for 25 years. I should recognize. Yet we still don't realize in the moment, right? And so that's happening to our young people, and it's never happened before. And there's not a lot of resources about there about like, okay, how do I manage that? How do I know? They're still new in their bodies. And also the hormones are still balancing out, right? As we get older, typically our hormones balance out. So it's kind of like reached a level where it's just here. We know the flow, right? But for young people, our bodies are like, whoa, what's happening? And it's all over the place. So those mood swings, those emotional changes can be a lot more intense because our bodies are just new figuring it out, but also because it's the first time the young person has experienced it. So they're like, what's happening? And just in pre-adolescence, adolescence, everything is a big deal, right? Everything is like the most momentous moment of life ever. And so hormones compacted on that is just like, the perfect moment.
right, today is the best day of my life. Today is the worst day of my life. So,
Yes,
so I mean,
exactly.
maybe as parents, we just need to recognize that we need to give our children extra compassion when they're going through this. And I know I always think back to when I was that age and how I would never, for $1 million, go back to being 12 or 13.
Oh, oh, never. Middle school, worst. Though I don't know anyone who's like, I loved middle school. Like, no, it's
Seriously.
the most challenging time of life because it's all the things packed in like the shortest time span.
And what about the social challenges that you mentioned?
Yeah, so a lot of it is from our peers, right? At that developmental stage, we're trying to fit in, right? We want to be like everyone else, we want to be with everyone else. So when all these things happen to our body and we feel like we're alone, then the teasing can come in, the bullying, the all of those things that happen, right? But also like these different challenges of I want to be with friends with different kinds of people, or now I'm having these like feelings of and urges in my body that I don't know what it means towards a friend or someone sitting next to me in my class. So now I feel awkward because my stomach is doing the butterflies, with my friend that I've had for years. Now, what does this mean? Why is my stomach making this feeling? Why am I sweating? Do I like them? Do they like me? And not just like romantically, right? But even with our friends, like, do they still like me? All these social changes of they're also like, I might want to be alone, right? Which might be a new thing. Like, I don't want my family to be around me, right? The famous sign on the door, no one enter, beware, or you must not, like all the no girls allowed, no all these things, these new boundaries and social settings that they're working through, which is hard as parents because suddenly your child is like, don't touch me. And you're like,
Right. You're so
what?
embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah, everything a parent does is embarrassing. My nephew is embarrassed of me consistently, constantly, at all times. And so it's just one of those things because they're trying to fit in with their peer group and establish their own identity as outside of the family unit.
Yeah. I remember once when one of my boys was in puberty age, I forget which one, and I was laughing really hard about something. And he said, Mom, your laugh is so annoying. And then it just made me laugh even more. He said, he kind of stopped and said, Didn't that hurt your feelings? And I was like, No, at this age, everything I do is supposed to be annoying and embarrassing. Like it's totally normal.
Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes it does hurt the feelings, right? Because the young kids, they'll go for it. They'll be like, but also, and you're like, I thought I was cool. Am I
Yeah.
not a cool mom? Wait.
For a few years, none of us will be cool, no matter what we do.
Yeah, exactly. We just gotta just let it go. And then, around 18, 19, you become the best person again. So it,
Yeah,
it
and
all
you can,
works
like,
out.
take them out for dinner and buy them socks when they need socks, and otherwise they'd have to pay for them themselves. I've got a 21-year-old, so I'm right there.
Oh, you're deep in it. Yeah.
I was thinking about the social thing too. I think it also would be hard if you're developing at a different rate than your peers also. Like, if you're a girl and you are getting breasts and other people in your class maybe are not getting breasts yet, or you're one of the later ones to develop and not, you're the last boy to have a mustache or whatever. I think that would be tricky also.
Yeah, a lot of the questioning at that time is, am I normal? Right. And the constant comparing of themselves to the people next to them. Right. So, we do see young girls, 8, 9, even younger, sometimes developing breasts, and maybe the parents are scared so they don't have a bra or whatever it might be. And so then people are noticing. And unfortunately, sometimes young girls that develop early are sexualized, which is a whole conversation for another day. But yeah, all of those social things come up for young people, and it all weighs on them and kind of just like stacks upon each other.
I mean, maybe a conversation for another day longer, but I think we could touch on that briefly because that was something I found really challenging with my daughter was that she got breasts quite young. She has quite large breasts, and she got a lot of unwanted attention when she would wear a bathing suit or even just what she would go out and she would come home fairly distressed at, 11 being stared at by men. And as a parent, how do you suggest that we help our kids when they are getting that when they are being sexualized, when they are not, no matter what age they are, probably we don't enjoy that sort of attention, but especially when they're little and still feel like they're a child.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that they know it's nothing that is their fault or nothing that they have done. Um, because that's what happens all the time. Like, you're not wearing the right clothes, or this is inappropriate, or you're like, the person is doing something that is wrong, and that can cause us a lot of shame in the future, really. So just letting them know, like, hey, this is not something you did. All bodies are different. Be proud of who you are. And then it's more of talking to the adults or the other people that are doing the behaviors and changing their behaviors. A lot of times we put the onus on a young person to, you have to dress a certain way or act a certain way, when we know that that's doesn't really change, how people might react to them in ways that are inappropriate.
Well, yeah, I mean, but what do you do when it happens when you're not with your child? Like, you can't really go and find the people that were staring at her and tell them to stop.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, just teaching them skills on how to stay safe, how to communicate, and having them know where to go for help if they do end up in a scary situation or something is happening is super important, right? Because we want our young people to be like, okay, to have the confidence to know that they should follow their instinct, right? Their gut. And if something feels off, to know, to be empowered to know what to do next, right? And so building that relationship with your young person, that they know they can call you or whomever they can call, or where they can go, that they won't get in trouble, and building that relationship is really important.
I have a very outspoken girlfriend who suggested that my daughter shout at the people, "You pervert, I'm 11 years old." But that didn't seem like a good solution, probably.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that could put her in an unsafe
Yes,
situation.
yes.
You
I
don't
mean,
know
it
who
was a
that
joke.
person
It
is.
was a joke, but
Yeah,
still.
yeah. And that might be right for some people, right? And in some situations. But it's really about keeping them safe and the relationship you build with them, so they know, okay, what can I do? And that might mean, if they're somewhere, who can they call? Like, do they have access to a cell phone? If they don't have an access to a cell phone, do they know where to go to make a phone call? Or do they know where to go that is a safe place if they feel like they're in an uncomfortable situation? And if they're not in a place they can go get help, how can we teach them things like, hey, walking with your head up, looking, being assertive, doing those little things to keep themselves safe when they can't reach out to an adult.
Yeah, my daughter has numbers of time on the subway or on the bus gone and sat next to an older woman and just said, "Can I sit with you?" That person's giving me the creeps. So, and anyhow, I see what you mean, that this is an entire other topic that we could discuss someday.
Yes.
Let's get back to
Yeah.
puberty. But I do think it's helpful because I know I have heard from a lot of parents that that is uncomfortable for their children getting unwanted attention, and it happens to everyone. So I think it's good that we touched on that at least. So, what about how do we talk to we you mentioned before that sometimes puberty is confusing because kids don't understand what's happening to them because they haven't been prepared. So for our listeners who do have small children, what are some tips that you have for how to talk about puberty and how to prepare them for how their bodies will be changing?
Yeah. A couple things. First, I would say for parents to be kind to yourself. We're often looking for like the perfect checklist of how to be the perfect parent. Be kind to yourself, right? The main goal is to create a trusting relationship with your child so that they feel comfortable asking you questions, right? And so that they know that if they ask a question, they're not going to be shamed, and that you'll either give them an answer or be honest and say you're not sure, and work together to find out an answer. I think that's building that trust bond, and that communication is really important. And also, as adults, working through our own stuff, right? Thinking about our own sexual identity development and what we were taught as kids and how that comes up and how folks parent is really important. But when we're talking to our young people, the main thing really is, it's not just a one-time conversation like, on this date, on this age, we're having the talk, right? It's not about that. It's about a lifelong conversation. And the very first part is, when you have young children, anatomy, right? We're not saying wee or cutesy names for our genitals, right? Just really calling it what it is, without the added of like, ooh, your vagina, right? All of the ooh, just like we would say our elbow, it's a vulva, it's a vagina, it's a penis, it's an anus. Just using those vocabulary in a very neutral way, just like any other body part, is really with our very young children really will set folks up for success in the future. And then things like not, when we're talking about periods, we don't have to hush hush. Someone's on their period. My mom was famous for like the loud whisper that wasn't really a whisper for things that were, you know, it indicated like a level of shame or something, right? If you have secrecy. If there's a pad or a tampon out, we don't need to hide those things, right? There's nothing to be ashamed of with those things. And if a young person says, "What's that?" "Oh, that's a pad." "What's a pad for?" "Oh, when mommy has her period," right? And so just really normalizing the conversation from a very young age will make it so much easier as they get closer to puberty to talk about it. If we all of a sudden sit a 10-year-old down and say, "And in the next couple of years, you're going to start bleeding," that's very scary, right? But if they've always heard about periods and they know what a vulva is and a vagina, it's less scary, right? And it's less scary. And you can even talk about your own experiences. If you're a person that menstruates, right? You can say, "Hey, this was how I felt. This is what I talked about." Really sharing your own experiences if you have them, as if you've menstruated, is really important. If you're a parent that doesn't menstruate, it's a little different, but still being open, right? A lot of times people are like, "Oh, well, the dads have the conversation with the boys," or whatever. But, all parents can have all conversations with all young kids. It's about normalizing it.
I think we did a pretty good job about that because I think my kids were just always in the bathroom with me, so they were always asking questions about menstrual supplies, and I think when they were little, I explained it. To think of an analogy, I called it a mama diaper, like the a pad. And once we were in a public washroom, and one of my boys shouted out, "Are you changing your mama diaper now?" It was so funny. But I think because of that, everyone and all my kids grew up with just a normalcy around periods. I mean, just because that was, my experience of puberty was having a period. And I think that there were also questions, why do you have hair there for pubic hair kinds of things? And those things just come up. And as you're answering those questions, it demystifies the whole body change that's going to happen. My daughter used to say, "When am I going to get puberty?" Like it was like a present or something.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's cute. When am I going to get puberty? Yeah, I mean, and you're exactly right. Like, just answering their questions, right? They hear things come up, and sometimes even they hear things that are not their developmentally like appropriate stage, but rather than shaming them or they're in trouble for saying a word, saying things like, "Oh, where did you hear that? And I'm so glad you came to me to ask me that." And then expanding is such great language to use because it keeps that connection for them, that they are like, "Okay, mom or dad or whomever said I couldn't use this word, but I wasn't in trouble for asking a question," which is so important because they're so inquisitive. They're going to ask everything that they see.
Yeah. And then I always find the younger they ask questions, the easier it is to have conversations about this stuff when nobody's embarrassed, right? It's just a matter of fact.
Yeah, and one thing that my sister does with my nephew a lot is she's like, well, she'll answer a question. She's like, "Well, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that?" And he usually thinks about it, and then like later in the day, he's like, "I have a follow-up question," which is great because he gets the chance to think about something and think about how he understands it or doesn't understand it, and then ask more questions.
I like that too because that gives your sister a chance to gauge what sort of level of response he's looking for, right? And not to give too much information or too little information, but getting a sense of like where's he at? What does he really want to know?
Exactly. I think, and that's a great point, right? What do they actually want to know? Because sometimes we're like, "I'm going to be sex educator parent of the year," and we give like a whole dissertation, and they're like, "Oh, I really just wanted to know this small little thing," and then we've just confused them.
Yeah, exactly. And if kids aren't asking, do you think there's a right time to talk about the changes that their body's going to be going through?
I what I would switch it to, there's never a wrong time, right? And creating this scenario that's not like awkward, right? Like I advise people to avoid the we're sitting down and having a conversation moment, because that can be a little scary. But if you're watching TV and something comes up, say, hey, what do you think about that? The young person is talking about, whatever it is. What do you think? Right? That's a really great time just to segue if they're not asking themselves, right? Because they might be thinking about it and maybe they're just too nervous, right? All of young people, even parents have great relationships with their kids, right? Some people are just more shy to ask questions. So it's a way to ask a probing question to see like what they're thinking. And if they're allowed to go on social media, you can look at posts together and be like, hey, what do you think of this post? Or I saw this on whatever YouTube video you were watching. What do you think about that? And that kind of opens the conversation starter door to kind of move forward. And maybe they'll start asking the questions then. Sometimes people need just a little bit more prompting.
Well, and I think little kids also probably will ask questions like, why do you have big breasts and I don't? Or why doesn't daddy have breasts? Or, different things, or they're just trying to work out how in the world these things all fit together. And those would probably be good opportunities as well for talking about body changes.
Exactly.
Like, well, when you grow up or when you're a teenager or whatever, this thing is going to happen to you also.
Yeah, exactly. I never forget. I was hanging out with my nephew, and I had to buy tampons or something at the store, and he was like, "Oh, what is that?" I'm like, "It's a tampon." He's like, "Well, what's that?" I'm like, "Yeah, my sister and I did not discuss how we were going to talk about this," but I just gave him a very like age appropriate, talk about it, and he was like, "Oh, well, that doesn't happen to my mom." I was like, "Oh, okay, let's talk about that more." So he was doing that comparison, like, right? Those are you normal? What's normal questions.
Yeah, I mean, they are so inquisitive and they're like little scientists, so they often have these ways of working it out.
And they notice everything. As much as we'd like to hope they don't, they notice every single thing.
One thing that that I think is really wonderful about certain cultures is that they have like or religions that like Jewish religion has the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah, which is like the celebration of moving into, womanhood or manhood or whatever. And I often wish that there was sort of like well, actually, I guess we did something to a certain degree, but if there was some sort of celebration of, crossing that bridge or making that change that was more culturally just that everybody did, right? Like some sort of coming of age ceremony. And I told you that I was going to tell you about my daughter's red party, which she's going to be coming on the podcast a little later to talk about it. But it's not very common, I don't think, but she had a party when she got her first period where we invited all of the important women and girls in her life. And we all wore red and ate red food, and she got little presents. And anyway, she's going to talk about it. But I think something like that, and I don't know what the equivalent for boys would be, but I think something like that, if it was part of our culture, it would make such a difference for the fear and shame factor that kids have.
Yeah, anytime we're removing sheer fear and shame and really celebrating just who we are as people and individuals is just another great moment to celebrate life, right? It's another thing, another milestone we go through, a rite of passage for some, right? And it's really interesting to see how around the world people do celebrate that kind of coming of age ritual.
Yeah. Do you know of others around the world? I'm just curious now.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of Latino cultures, Latin A cultures, they do quinceañeras when someone's 15. In a lot of African cultures, people do what's called going to the bush, and that's their circumcision ceremony, which is older, right? Not like in the Jewish ceremony, it's in the first 3 days, or in some folks in the United States, it's in the hospital when baby is first born. Excuse me. They do it older, between 11 to like 15, depending on what country and what ethnic group they're in. So it's around the world a lot of different things that people do as this like rite of passage to adulthood, which is really exciting and fun.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much. I know it's going to be a really helpful conversation for a lot of parents who just, are either confused by what their children are going through, or maybe we've taken away a little bit of the fear and they feel a little bit more prepared if their children haven't yet approached puberty, and that those maybe four horsemen of adulthood won't be quite so
Love it.
hard to take.
Yeah.
So I have a question that I ask all my guests about advice to young parents. And if there's a piece of advice that you would give to young parents, it can be about what we talked about today, or it can be about anything that you wish parents knew. And maybe through your work, you've come across and this, oh, I wish parents knew this.
Yeah. I think, that it's going to be okay. And that what your young person really wants is your love and your time, right? And so focusing on building the relationships and open communication is so important beyond almost anything else. And especially when we're talking about anything, puberty or sexuality or growth and development related, just focus on the relationship. And it's okay if you bumble words or don't have all the answers, because as long as you're being honest and open with your young person from the beginning, that'll continue throughout their life. And you won't have to try to build that relationship when they're 16 and don't want to even like be in the same room as you, right? It'll
When you're in
already
the
be there
uncool
as a
phase.
foundation. Yeah, when you're in the uncool phase, because you already have that. And even though it might seem scary if you bungle a word, like they're not going to remember if you use the wrong terminology. They're going to remember, I remember my mom was, or my dad or whomever was so open and I could talk to them about anything, even if they didn't know the answer. And so that's what's most important, I think.
I love that. That's great advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Maxine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on and being willing to talk about this, because I think it's going to help a lot of parents who feel a little bit daunted about their child going into puberty and about their daughter getting her first period. So I really appreciate that you're willing to talk about this.
I wanted to say something before you ask me any questions
Okay,
about what you just said.
sure.
I don't think that parents should be scared about their kids having puberty because, I'm still in the middle of the puberty thing. But especially if you're a parent to a girl and you're anxious about their getting their period and what all the puberty stuff, I would say my number one tip as a kid perspective of you and dad, me being turning into a teenager slash young lady, I would say the most important thing is to make sure that your kid has all the things that they need, but make sure that they also know that they don't need you to know that you don't need to know everything. But I don't know if that makes sense, but thinking about how I feel comfortable to talk to you and Daddy about things that I want to know, but also to know that you guys aren't gonna get into
Your business?
area, and that I don't feel scared to tell you stuff because you guys have said that if there's anything that I need ever, then you're not gonna be crazy or anything.
Yeah.
I don't know if that has anything to do with what you're
No,
saying.
I think that does. First of all, I think parents sometimes get worried about their kids growing up, and everyone hears so many horror stories about teenagers and how awful they are. And so they worry that, when puberty starts, like my child is going to be not recognizable and we're not going to be close anymore, and they're going to do bad things.
I
And
have one thing to add about that.
okay.
I think sometimes the reason why adults think that teenagers are horrible, it's because their parents make them crazy, which makes them feel like they have to be bad because they are mad at their parents and stuff like that. So if you're not crazy, then your kids won't be crazy. That's the number one rule.
That makes sense. Well, and so I think what you're saying is you appreciate it that you know that you can always talk to us about anything, and that we have open communication, and that you have some privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that's a very good general tip for parents, I think. So, do you remember, and we specifically will get back on the subject of puberty. Do you remember ever first learning, do you remember how you learned about puberty that was going to happen and changes that were going to happen to your body or periods or things like that?
I think maybe I heard people talking about it at school. I don't know if this is just imaginary or if this actually happened, but I think I heard people talking about it at school in like first grade, and I was like asked you what it was or something, and I probably still didn't understand it that much, but then in like grade 4 I had this one day health class, and I never had it again. But okay, first of all, I think the health classes in Toronto are terrible until you get to high school, because when I was in elementary school and middle school, I had one hour health class the whole time over that whole span of 8 years. And I don't think that's very good. And the one health class that I got in elementary school was the teacher, who was a man. He split up my class into girls and boys, and he talked to the boys, and it was a 4-5 class, and he told the older girls to tell us about different things, but they also had no idea what they were talking about. And so they were just like, guys, do you know what a period is? And that brings me to what you were asking, was they were like talking about it. And then I think after, like, I came home and I asked you again what it meant. And then I like understood what it was because I was like older.
So you always knew about my period when you were little.
Yeah, but I just didn't like understand it. I don't think.
So that was when you felt like you were starting to want some more information.
Yeah.
And we talked about it.
But I think, I don't know what it is, because people, like teenagers, always are like so embarrassed to like ask their parents about sex ed questions and stuff. But I never had a problem with that. Like, I don't know if you remember, but I would just like ask you just random questions all the time. Like, Mom, what is an orgasm? Like, what even is that? Like, just asked you randomly that one day, and you told me, and I was just like, okay, and then I just went to go play with my toys or something.
Yeah. Well, I think the key is, and I think we talked about this with the guest expert, the key is to talk about things when kids are little before they get embarrassed about things, right? Like if you didn't know, if you until you were older, and then you might feel embarrassed asking the questions. But you definitely did used to ask lots of questions, and then you would just get the answers and you'd be like, okay, great, I'm on my way now. That's it. And I remember when you were little, you would say, when am I going to get puberty? Like it was just this one thing that you got one day. Okay, so let's talk about red parties. So I first learned about it because our neighbor and friend Lily had a red party when she had her first period. And I told you about it, and you were probably about like 6 maybe when that happened. And all those years since, you said, I want to have a red party. And do you remember talking to me like sometimes when we would lie in bed at night? Do you remember talking about it when you were little? Like really little, like 6, 7, 8?
Maybe not that little, but I feel like I like somehow remember being like planning it out. But I was like, I'm gonna invite Karen and Peggy and Alla and all of my friends and the grown-ups, and we're gonna have cake, and it's gonna be so fun. Like I would say that all the time.
Yeah, and you would list off all of the women in your life, like the women and women friends and young women friends, and then you would say, and daddy. And so we decided on the day that we didn't invite daddy. We just had it be women. I think he was fine with that. So what did you like about having a red party, and what did you appreciate about it? Well, first, you know what? First, I'm just going to say what we did. It was during COVID, so we had to have it outside, but we invited the close women in your life and young women, and we encouraged people to wear red. And I bought those like red Mardi Gras beads, and we had red streamers decorating the yard, and we had red velvet cake, red punch. I think we had red chips and salsa, and just ate a lot of red things.
It was funny how we had to like serve the cake in such a funny way because it was like COVID, and so everyone was trying to like stay far away.
I know. We had to social distance. We like take a piece of cake and put it on a stool, and then the person would, when we'd back up, and then the person would come and get it.
It was really funny.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you remember what did you like about the red party, and why do you think people should do it?
I liked that all of the people that I felt close to, they were like coming to like support me, because it didn't necessarily feel scary, but I was kind of just like, whoa. Like, I didn't think like, whoa, I'm a grown-up now, because I was like 12, but it was a little bit freaky, because I was like, oh my gosh, there's blood coming out of my vagina, like, what the heck is going on? And so I think it felt nice that all of those people came, and and they were just, I don't know, they were just like there for me, and it was just a fun time. And I was just like, all these people are like women, and they went through the same thing, and none of them seem scared for me, so it must be okay.
So it made you feel supported, and it made you feel maybe a little less anxious about the fact of having your period now?
Yeah.
I think a lot of girls are like not looking forward to getting their period and afraid of getting their period. Do you think knowing that you were going to have a party about it made it a little bit easier?
Maybe that was one of the things, but I think because I felt like it wasn't some like mystery, I kind of knew what was going to happen. It didn't feel as scary, which brings me back to what I said at the beginning of this, was like, if you talk to your kids in a not scary way about all this stuff, then everything will go a lot smoother.
Well, that is a great place to stop. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Maxine.
No problem. Bye, Mama.
Bye, honey. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.